Why aren't you Catholic?
I'm in Provo, Utah, so I'll let you guess.
All right. I am going to guess you were raised a Mormon.
Yes.
All right.
You are right. What a good guess.
I know.
So,
I'm good at this.
I would still consider myself an active member of the LDS Church. I'm just starting to think a little bit more about things.
Yes.
So I have a question about the papacy, but I want to preface the question first because I've started to doubt the Great Apostasy, if that's okay.
Sure.
Like a year ago or so, I was in Rome and I saw the Vatican, all the other sites.
Yeah.
And I just became sort of interested in Catholicism.
Sure.
And I started hearing about Marian apparitions and the Eucharistic miracles, and I just that's an interesting thing to me that these miracles could be happening in a church that I don't believe is true. And so I started to realize I was sort of uneducated when it came to Catholic beliefs.
Yes.
And I'd always been told a lot about the Great Apostasy, and that the Great Apostasy was not only a loss of priesthood authority,
Yes.
but as a result of that loss of authority, a loss or a change in plain and precious truths too. The doctrine had changed because of that.
Yes.
And so I started to realize that this is something that people had told me and not something I've actually researched on my own.
Yes.
And I thought it was sort of unfair to have an opinion that an entire church had apostatized and changed the doctrine and removed Christ's presence from earth without actually coming to that conclusion myself.
Yes.
And so this is when I found out, I started to do some research that Catholic beliefs and dogmas
Yes.
are found incredibly early in the church.
Yes.
And for example, a lot of the books that are written in the New Testament, Jude, the Gospel of John, 1st through 3rd John,
Yes.
and a lot of others are arguably written at the same time or after a lot of the works of the early Christian believers.
Yeah.
Clement as Bishop of Rome, St. Ignatius and his letters to Antioch. And so I started to sort of come to this conclusion that how could the church have apostatized at the same time that the New Testament is being written? And so it seems to me sort of an ironic thing to have a New Testament in your canon that you believe was written by the same group of people who apostatized as they're writing the Bible. How can the writers of the Bible also be the ones who apostatized from it?
Yeah, you raise a very good question.
And so,
go ahead.
And I know this is long. I'm sorry, I'm getting there, I promise.
No, I said take your time. Go ahead. It's worth it. Go ahead.
So basically, we see, in history, I don't think the doctrine really changed or there's much of a basis for that. In history, we also see sort of the organization of the Catholic Church very early on. It's we see bishops and we see sort of a primacy of Rome. So Rome, I guess, Clement was writing to someone to settle a dispute. And,
sure. Yes.
And so I think we can see Peter as a pope or a leader of the church.
Yes.
And we can see Clement in Rome as arguably a leader of church, but we don't really see, in my opinion, early on, or at least I haven't found evidence yet for sort of the papal definition that's sort of stated in Vatican I. And so I was wondering, was the Bishop of Rome always called Pope or the head of the church, or is it more implied based on the chair of Peter with the jurisdiction of Rome?
Is your question more than the Pope and Peter's primacy and all that as opposed to the apostasy, or is it related to both?
I mean, it's sort of related to both. I think the idea of a great apostasy is obviously pretty crucial to the belief of the LDS Church.
Sure.
But if there is a papal succession from Peter onward through the framework that he created and Jesus created, then there isn't really a great apostasy.
First of all, our Lord Jesus Christ, when he founded the church on St. Peter, said, the gates of hell will not prevail against it. That doesn't mean we're not going to have sinners side, but that the church, he insulated omnipotently from having such an apostasy. It makes no sense at all that the gates of hell are not going to prevail. Say the gates of hell are not going to prevail against my church, and yet within the time of the apostles or a few centuries later, depending on one's perspective, that there's this great apostasy. If there were a great apostasy side, you'd see evidence from the enemies of the church. You do not. In fact, you see critical comments about the Eucharist precisely because they're saying, hey, that's kind of cannibalism from our perspective. You really believe in the real presence, don't you? And it's yeah. And the church was not looking to, in times of persecution, to give them unneeded reasons to persecute them, but they would say to the contrary, no, this is true, but you need to understand it properly. So those are the kinds of things you see from outsiders, not by saying, oh, look, they all fell apart. You don't see that. More to the point on St. Peter and his primacy. You mentioned the Pope, and is he called a father? Well, we see he is the fulfillment in the Davidic kingdom in the Old Testament, the Old Covenant. In Isaiah 22, verses 15 to 25, talks about how there was a steward or prime minister over the house of David, and how he would open and shut. And also he was called a father to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. He was under the Davidic king. Of course, we know Jesus Christ is the King of Kings, fulfills it, and therefore in restoring Israel, the kingdom of Israel, he is the King of Kings. Isaiah 22, 15 to 25 shows that in the Old Covenant, that is the Old Covenant for the Davidic kingdom of Israel, there was not only a king, but a prime minister or steward over the house of David, right? David being the king and his successors being Davidic successors. This successor had primacy. He had the power to open and shut. He also, we see that it was an office of succession, that is, the corrupt Shebna is replaced by the righteous Eliakim. In the New Covenant, we see that Peter, it's founded on Peter. There's a certain primacy he has, that on this church, I will build my church upon this rock, Peter. And people say, oh no, it's just talking about his faith. No, look at John 1:42, where it talks about Cephas, rock. That's Aramaic, a Greek form of it. He is rock. He is the foundation. Not only because of Christ does the office of the papacy have primacy, and it makes sense that to preserve unity that you would have primacy. This, of course, is the King of Kings in restoring the kingdom of Israel. There are also other people who say, well, does he have primacy? Can we have other evidence that? You look for him in the New Testament, he is always listed first. Look at when he goes to the tomb. John gets there first. He waits, then Peter goes in. And a great one in Luke chapter 22 for having primacy, it says to Peter, Jesus says to Peter, Satan has called and requested to sift you all. The you is plural. But I have prayed for you, Peter, singular, that when, your faith will not fail. And after you have, he alludes to his falling away in terms of his denial of 3 times, you will confirm your brethren. In other words, he has a certain authority. We see it again in John 21, verses 15 to 17, that Peter, he's, feed my lambs, tend my sheep. And we also see in the early church, and people can go to Catholic.com, where we have various things from the early church fathers that affirm that Peter had a primacy, and we see it exercised in the early church. So this is not some latter day or later development. It is early on in the church. It is biblically founded. It comes from Jesus Christ, not by man, and it is affirmed otherwise in the early church about the church from St. Irenaeus and others, that the church of Rome, that there is a primacy of the Bishop of Rome going back to Jesus Christ and his founding the church on St. Peter.
Jake, I'll tell you what, we actually have a book called The Early Church Was the Catholic Church that makes this argument and others and goes into the history in quite a bit of detail. And it's a wonderful book, I think, because it's only about the first 200 years of the church. So those who say, well, the early church, was different than the Church of Constantine or something, this book is very helpful. So we'll send it to you if you just give us an address to send it in Provo, Utah.